Voyage to the Virtual departs from an interest I've had for a while in this notion of expanded perception. And I was particularly interested in the expanded perception we experience today in the meeting with contemporary art, perhaps particularly art that is media-based, such as video art and interactive art and light art. The relationship between that and the expanded perception that we encounter in our everyday environment, where we are opening up to multiple dimensions, and we are living in a digital reality that sort of requires our eyes to focus in a different way, and our body. We are embodied in this real virtual reality, we can say. And perception is in fact, or the perceptual sphere, is something that has been of interest to Nordic artists for quite a while. And we find that we find a curiosity about that in a lot of Nordic contemporary art, especially in this meeting between, or this dichotomy, I would say, between the authentic and the mediated, especially when it relates to inner space and how sort of the internal reacts to that contrast or that conflicted meeting, and also in terms of the human psychic encounter with mediated images. And some of the qualities that I see in contemporary Nordic art that have this aesthetic trait are, for example, a quality of patience, of deep reflection, of a very close observation of the artwork. You both see that reflected in how the artist works with it, but also considered in terms of the audience experience with the artwork. I think that those situations of experience that you have in these universes or sort of spatial arrangements that these artworks make vantage point from which you can enter a realm of perception, perhaps of expanded perception, because you have to allow time, and that is quite interesting in terms of looking at Nordic art in this context. And that also counters a reality we have today where deep reflection is not very common. The world is really fast. Our attention is really split, and it's very hard to focus on one thing. So therefore, I found it really interesting to work with Nordic art in an exhibition about expanded perception. And I was curious about this idea that we may re-encounter our environment through perceptual journeys to spaces beyond the world and also beyond the eye. Also with the digital evolution in society, we are embodied in the world in a new way. There's a corporeality to the mode of experience that we have, especially in terms of media. We don't just look at an image, we're surrounded by it, and we're surrounded by that data, and we are breathing it, and it's really become part of us. We're almost avatars in a digital reality, and that corporeality of perception is also interesting, I think, to consider in an aesthetic environment, and to see how contemporary artists might respond to that, or take that and challenge that mode in their artworks, which is what I see a lot in the works in this exhibition. Then it's this virtuality, which is also in the title, Voyage to the Virtual. We often think about the virtual in terms of a simulation or a representation of a place elsewhere, or an artificial environment. We are familiar with virtual reality, for example. But I have also been looking into the theories of Henri Bergson, the French philosopher who wrote in the very early 20th century, who took the virtual as a kind of metaphor for perception. and he considered it as this reciprocal, intuitive passage between memory and perception and imagination. So the virtual becomes more of a sort of perceptual experience, the process of being in that experience. And also looking back at his theories, the virtual relates to this notion of somatic sensing with your body and not just with your eye, and experiencing the world through the technologies of the image. The voyage or the voyage is a concept deeply rooted in a Nordic, perhaps nostalgic self-perception, in the sense that since ancient times the voyage has been the sort of structure through which the Nordic region and the countries in it could relate to the world through trade and through riots and through just explorations to new areas of the world. So it's kind of deeply anchored in that sense. And also if you think about the expeditions to Greenland and to America, to the Arctic, later up in history, the voyage is also driving these. And in a sense, what's interesting about the voyage is that it's driven by a curiosity of the unknown and of what we might realize, or the consciousness we might reach in the unknown about how the world is actually connected to itself, or reaching a new perspective on a new sort of self-perception. In this context, the voyage offers a point of departure for exploring our contemporary perceptual journeys to unknown territories. Perhaps not unknown territories in the world, not as a physical concept, but of a world with a digital landscape and a virtual ecology. So it's almost like a new world we need to explore. And these are journeys not just of movement and of travel, but also of body and mind. So they might, in a sense, through the voyage, we are led to discover new phenomena or extend our understanding of the world in this virtual realm as well. And that's where it ties back to the exhibition.
For me, I think it's interesting to start from the title of the exhibition, Voyage to the Virtual. Because I would like to say voyage through the virtual. I mean, it's not something we are going to. It's something we are going through all the time. And for this, we have to be very clear about what we mean by virtual. If we keep, it's an old debate. I'm not saying something totally new, but if you keep in mind that the virtual is what precedes the actual, in a way that what precedes actualization of the real, this is a very interesting time, and this is why artists are interested in experiencing this. What does it mean to create is something which is a question. It's more, the virtual is a question. It's not an answer. It's not like when you see a picture is an answer. It can be a question as well, but it's everything is given. And you can interpret, but as a thing you perceive, it's already given. So when I said the virtual is a question, it's a question as to the real. What form the actualization of the world, of the work, will it be? What the world or the work will take? What shape it will take? So it's something about the unexpected. I was thinking about what could be, an exhibition about the virtual could be entitled "The Real and Before," which, of course, would be different from the real and beyond, what has been the expectation of many artists trying to foresee the future. Actually, The virtual is more about what things could be, how they could become something. So this is what we see before it would happen. And so before that, what the difference between working with the virtual as a material for an artist and what was possible before with literature, cinema, film, painting. I think the difference is that before we could, of course, imagine things, we could tell them, we could read them, we could see them, but now we can experience the virtual stage of life. I mean, this stage where life is hesitating between many options before becoming what is our life. So this is the uninformed, unshaped life. I'm trying to define what is the specificity of what is material of the virtual, and it's at the same time, this is a support and the medium. And if we work with this in between undecided world, undefined, something happens which is new in the history of art. Is the fact that the shape the world will take is, as we are experiencing it, is our shape. The world is shaped by our experience. So I say the virtual is the best place for questions. This is the best place to put things where the artist doesn't want to say the truth, to tell the truth, but he wants something to emerge from our experience of it, of the work. And so I think what is very exciting is that this dialogue creates multiple fragmented answers, and everybody can then, of course, interpret, like we interpret painting, the result, but can also experience the emergence of this result, of the outcome of the work.
From the outset, the promise has been attached to digital images, crediting them with a special immediacy and tactility, and thus also affectivity. And in this process of digitization, one specific element of the picture is said to be lost, the frame of the picture. As a result, however, the affective body gains a new important task, the task of reframing perception of reality. Now, this reframing goes back to Henri Bergson, the French philosopher at the end of the 19th century, who defined the distance between one image of the world and the next as an interval. And this interval was later defined by Gilles Deleuze, the French philosopher, in his books on cinema as the time of affect. Today, this interval plays a very important part in visual and media theories, marking exactly the place where the body interacts independently with its media and visual environment, since the processes of matter and information have become entwined to such an extent that they are about to reach or even overstep a biological threshold, and thus defining the initial parameters of the so-called biomedia body.
I would say that we witness quite a few inner journeys, and that in many cases we are taking on spatial experiences extended in time on several different planes at the same time, like choreographies, like of movements, narratives, and we enter different worlds. In many ways, I would say cinematic experiences, sometimes with moving images present or the apparatus present, but often absent. So we can say perhaps that there's been a shift from film medium to film experience. So instead of entering something as in film, we enter several works today as in film experiences, so that we experience someone else's experiences, like an image of an image.
I think there is an aesthetic or a sensational feeling of this way of being moved that is interesting. It's just not a way of being, but it's also something that has a particular way of being in the world and of being or of experiencing the world. So that's why I think it may be important in digital media and digital media art to investigate in this way of experiencing. I see that in lots of works that are not necessarily about transport. Transport is this being carried across space, but many video works, for example, the way that they compose the progression of images could have something similar to it, that you feel that you're moving through this cinematographic progress without any particular goal, and sort of creates the same experience of just being in a cinematographic space or an image space for a while.
I was thinking about keywords that are not keywords. That would be the materiality of works. It's very often made of light, smoke, image, smell. It's translucent, it's moving, it's undefined, it's reacting, it's adapting, it's dialoguing. And all these things, you see, should be understood as a kind of moving matter, a kind of plasticity, global plasticity, in which the experience of the work going through the virtual, as I said, is actually shaping it like leaving a footprint. And this is why the emotional impact can be very strong. Because we are not facing something that we have to guess about the meaning. We are just feeling the fact that we are discovering a world which is specifically reacting to our existence and our presence. So for me, the big lesson of the virtual, as probably at the beginning computers have introduced in the art field, the big lesson is we can, in a way, change the world because we know it at the virtual level. I mean, before it is actualized. So artists can be part of the answer. And maybe if it's not part of the answer, if the artist is not part of the answer, it will be part of the question. And that's already a lot.
According to Whitehead, perception is first and foremost a physical process, which is defined as emotional. He called it a blind emotion that is received as felt elsewhere in another occasion. This involves not an accumulation of data, but always a data relationship. And the perceiving subject does not pre-exist the perceived world, but emerges through and in the process of perception. I guess this is a very important new development, and which is definitely linked to the digital image world.
It's important to deal with the fact that we share so much imagery today, and that we have a shared image world to which we relate to. So the cinematic experience or the film experience engage both the viewer's body and their consciousness, and dissolve the distance between that which happens there on the screen and here in the viewer. So when I say that we are in different places and different times at the same time, this is an example of that, how we sort of travel in between different time relations and space relations, and where our real life situation can be very much like a film experience or a cinematic experience. And again, I sort of I'm not talking about the film medium, but the film experience. So the experience of the experience contributes with bodily experience in viewing situations in a different way than it has been before, where we before used to base a lot of viewing situations on the eye and models based on the eye, say, for example, psychoanalytic theory. Today, models are more based on the brain and what type of images we already have. So I would say that this type of perception contribute to our consciousness, that we alter between images that we don't really have to see, but they become active when we meet other images. So it's a constant sort of effect of images. So instead of talking about representation, thinkers such as Gilles Deleuze, for example, wouldn't say that representation is the sort of question to ask, but instead, what effect does the image have on us? And how does it work? And what powers does it come with when an image meets another image?
I think this experience of being carried across space, or being moved through space, this aimless continuity, I think that's important for our daily lives and for the way we experience our daily lives in different ways. It's important in the sense that we are familiar with the experience very much from our everyday life, dealing with media that stimulate this kind of experiences. The scrolling of pages and on the internet, or social media platforms that invite to this continuous experience of surfing on the internet. All these familiar experiences are part of this the larger experience of continuity. So I think that's very important for the subjectivity that characterizes this or is stimulated by the use of media. That it's actually stimulating this continuous travel through space in a very direct way.
I do think that exhibitions and moving image installations, we can certainly define them as aesthetic spaces. They do offer us a distinct maybe point of entry into a space in which our awareness of our modes of perception and our sense of perception becomes more heightened. So I think I've been looking in my own research at artists who have worked with the installation, or particularly the exhibition, as a kind of journey. So artists who overtly structure or choreograph a journey for exhibition visitors. And here an example I might give is works by Philippe Perreno, his exhibition at the Serpentine a couple of years ago, and also the work of Ryan Trecarton. There's a kind of choreography at stake. So there's a sort of journey that is presented maybe to the exhibition visitor. But I think there are differences maybe in the ways in which we might conceive of both those journeys. I think Benayoun is still quite fascinated by certainly the non-human, which I've mentioned already, but he's, I think, also working with an idea of a kind of imaginative transport. And it relates a little bit, or corresponds a bit to the idea of the voyage. So he's made works that involve references to the train, so work filmed from the vantage point of a train. And that's a sort of an established motif in thinking about journeying. But I think there's a big difference between that and recent work that Ryan Trecarton and Lizzie Fitch have made, which, and here I want to reference particularly a show called Sight Visit at Kunstwerk in Berlin, where they presented the visitor with a kind of sensorium of sound and image and furnishings and these textured surfaces and even vibrating seating. So it's very absorbing, and it in a way it seems quite immersive. And they're dealing with quite expansive concepts, but actually they don't present us with a journey to another realm, or a realm that corresponds with an idea of an imagined future, for example, even though they do reference sort of future of human society. That is one of their concerns. I think what they present is something that's really mundane. If it's a journey, it's not an epic journey. It's very quotidian. So the world that you enter into is just full of sort of minutiae, very self-absorbed, constantly chattering characters who have very confused and contradictory positions. So there's definitely no sense of a kind of cohesive or coherent world that you're entering into. It's overpoweringly trivial. So I think in a way they're dealing with an idea of a sort of voyage to the virtual that's actually the opposite of a kind of epic journey. It's much more bogged down in kind of trivia and everyday exchanges that are very self-absorbed, and it's quite bleak in a way.
These new relationships are again, for me, characterized by these kind of senses of their liquid nature, of a kind of a swampy horizontality. Horizontality, I think, is a very good word to use for describing the non-hierarchical relation that exists between body and image, such that, and I think we see this in Anne Lieselgaard's work in the exhibition, for example, the sense of being immersed within the architecture of the image, but being immersed in the image that is presented within her video. But at the same time, there's a sense of spatial confusion, if you like. We're never quite sure of our footing. We're never exactly sure of where we are, where the images and the architecture kind of constantly seems to move around us. And I think this kind of non-hierarchy of the image, this inability to fix a kind of constant division between image and body is something that's significant and also not unproblematic as well. Of course, there's certain problems that arise from this sense of a kind of a liquid or accelerated immersion within a world of images.
In this discussion, Henri Bergson is very important because he was the one explaining to us that we don't perceive the world without the body, but actually the body is an image in itself. And the image, my body as an image, is always involved in my perception of the outer world, of the outer reality. So that means, that images are not pure images, but always images overlapping, and so referring to all the images and other images. And he underpins that we have to consider our body, or this importance of the body, because the fact is that our body is not a mathematical point in space. That means the body is something which is always open to the outer world. My body, he wrote once, is that which stands out as the center of this perception. My personality is the being to which these actions must be referred. For Bergson, it is this body that processes perception like a filter and subtracts the relevant aspects in any given case from the totality of perspective possibilities. So that means actually it is the body filtering my perception, and without the body there is no perception at all. Actually the body helps me to filter the surroundings of me and also the images I am perceiving. Now this is very interesting because the philosophy of Bergson is quite old, but through this digitization process a lot of writers, a lot of theorists have gone back to Bergson. Actually he has a whole renaissance in this debate, and it's quite interesting in which ways he has very early, during the 19th century actually, and the last third of the 19th century, he has developed a theory of the body, a theory of the brain, where the brain is conceived of as a telephone instrument, actually, doing, the combinations, the relations and the interruptions. So everything, was conceived in Bergson's term from the body, and to understand how we perceive the world of images around us.
There's a really great image that I often kind of carry with me when I'm thinking about these kind of questions of images. And it's a really analog image. It comes from this 1973 film, kind of B-grade movie called The Messiah of Evil. And while, of course, this is an analog, film, and perhaps it's a long way away from the sort of the usual sort of techno culture, the sort of digital culture that people often use to talk about our relationship between bodies and images today, for me it becomes quite a powerful way of thinking about this very kind of direct impact in terms of the heightened experience, I think, that we have of images. I think it's a kind of a conundrum in many ways, because I think we're so often constantly bombarded by images, just in our media culture when we walk into the street, by kind of our screens, big and small and medium-sized, that almost the images become kind of ubiquitous. But then at the same time, there is a very powerful sense, as I think Brian Masumi has demonstrated, and others, of the images' ability to control our experience through affect.
Many recent theoretical approaches in media and cultural studies today underpin a development that distances itself from critiques of representation and orients itself toward an effective reading or an effective interpretation of the visual. According to these theories accompanying this shift, digital media are contributing to these changes in a range of ways. Digital media, the theories claim, are freshly questioning the status of the image, having fundamentally altered its production reception and propagation, as well as the relationship between viewer and image, thus calling for a different theory, a new philosophy of the media. In other words, digital images are seen today as the cause of multi-layered changes that range from digital surveillance and online criminality through to new forms of image and sound post-production and distribution.
One theme would be a struggle or an exploration, depending how you see it, to question image conventions. So, for example, the Swedish documentary filmmaker Mia Engberg, she did the film called Belleville Baby, a documentary about memories. And the way she goes about to do this film, I think, is shows very well what sort of questions she works with and what themes she works with. Being a documentary filmmaker, she wants to sort of test the limits for where she could, what topic she can make a documentary about. So to make a documentary about memories of experiences, it needs some fictive elements to it, but the fictive elements she uses makes it extremely authentic. So the mixture of the documentary mode and the fictive sort of strategies adds to the sense of reality. And I think these borders between the real and fiction, between dream and reality, between different image worlds are themes that we see in Nordic and contemporary art.
Well, I think we could say that artists, certainly when they think about changes in perceptual experience, one of the ways I think that they do that is through exploring transport, actually. And here I would think that they explore the imagination of transport, but they also explore quite practical sort of infrastructural aspects of transport. So I've been looking in my own research at a whole range of artists who've made works that are involve or are actually about forms of transport like roads, bridges, airports, ports, even sort of references to space travel. So those kinds of transport modes and infrastructures are actually really pervasive in contemporary art, and they're not new, but I think they're very prevalent. And I think if we go back to the ways in which artists have thought about changes in perceptual experience, we can see that transport figures quite strongly. And I'm here thinking of, quite an early example, such as Tony Smith's quite famous account of traveling on the unfinished New Jersey Turnpike. He traveled on it in the 1950s and spoke about it in the 60s, and his experience was really important for theorists like Michael Fried in thinking about minimalism and the changing situation of the artworks. So transport's actually a really important reference in understanding perceptual change. And I would say that another area that's also of interest to me is around prosthetic extension, the idea of extending the self through technologies and a very broad range of technologies, such as those that were theorized by people like Marshall McLuhan, whose ideas are really coming back, I think, into circulation again. And I've been looking at artists who have used technologies like cars, drones, and also sort of robotic arms and other devices to film video work so that they can articulate these kinds of ideas of sort of self-extension through machines and through other technologies.
I think it's quite difficult to separate the Nordic art scene from the rest of the contemporary art scene, but maybe that's better to talk about from a few examples. But when it comes to viewing positions, I would say that we first, the cinematic experience that I talk about is definitely a part of these new viewing positions that we see in the contemporary art scene, and then a shift from what I would call an abstract viewer to an individual or a specific viewer as well. So when we have this shift from representation to immanence and direct experience, we shift from representation to presentation, where the image is more direct to us. Or let's say in sound art, and for example, an artist like Jonas Dahlberg, Swedish artist Jonas Dahlberg, in a sound piece and an installation that he did a few years back, he collected an archive of normal citizens' memories from films. And so he was just asking people to describe a room in a film. And from this, he made an archive, and the presentation of it was a sound installation where voices read these descriptions of cinematic rooms. A lot of people were describing the corridor of Shining, for example. And when you listen to these descriptions, different images from the same scene sort of are immediately triggered and sort of activate your own memory from this film room. And I think this is an example of the change or a new viewing position where you don't stand from a distance and watch an image, but instead sort of have an immediate relation to the image because it's already there. And the image or the environment or the installation you meet is sort of the meeting with the image you already have and the new situation or the new image. It could be moving images, it could be sculpture, it could be painting, it could be objects, it could be anything. But it takes you on a sort of virtual tour or journey via yourself as a viewer and your own images that you already have.